Hello and welcome back. Today we're going to talk about My Hero Academia chapter 264. Last week we found out, or rather we saw the end of the chapter with HAWKS. People were really hyped as to what was going to happen starting this chapter, and we had some pretty interesting developments with Twice and HAWKS, which I really liked seeing, as well as a snippet of Dabi involved as well. So I think we're going to be seeing a pretty big conflict happening real soon. But first, let's talk about the earlier parts of the chapter, both with Estro as well as the parts with Class 1B, because I feel like these parts were pretty good. Like altogether, this chapter was a really nice addition. And with Estro, seeing him being unaware and suddenly coming to terms with what's happening, he seemingly had no idea that the heroes were coming. They were no idea that they were attacking. And when he finds out, you just see this maximum stress level go through the roof, right? Like he just goes absolutely crazy over what's going on. He thinks they're safe and everything's good because they obviously don't suspect a thing. But he being one of the sort of bigger players of the Liberation Front, he's going to be doing some crazy things in the upcoming chapters. You can already tell they've been told that the villa is surrounded, and the only way at this point in time is to either surrender or to fight back as best they can. And they have a pretty big number of people, so I mean theoretically they probably can do a pretty good effort in fighting back. And I think that's what we're gonna be seeing, because the Liberation Front is not exactly the type of organization to kneel to the heroes, especially when Shigaraki is in charge of everyone, as well as the fact that Estro himself's ideology kind of revolves around the liberation of people and the liberation of quirk usage. Freedom and liberation is a pretty big theme regarding their organization, whether you look at Shigaraki or you look at Estro. So they're obviously not just gonna surrender, give up, and hope for a good sentence to serve and then, have a reformal of their life, kind of like what Hawk was saying to Twice. I don't think we're gonna be seeing that at all. I think this is most definitely going to blow out of proportion very soon. We're gonna be seeing this turn into like a small war between heroes and villains. Now let's talk about the members of Class 1B, because they are obviously sort of a big part in the sort of first half of this chapter when we saw Mudman and Shimage, or as some people may know them as, Kinoko and Yuzo. I really like the fact that we get to see students that are not necessarily as big of a deal to the entirety of the story actually have some usefulness to them. Like we had Kaminari, who has been kind of lacking when looking at the bigger picture, and now we have Yuzo and Kinoko, which are 1B members. And 1B members are definitely people that need more focus, no matter who they are, because none of them had really had enough. Not even the big ones like Monoma and Kendo, like they've just not had enough screen time or depth to them that we can really say that these are good and well developed characters. There just isn't enough content to really say that. So the fact that we're seeing at least some of them, even if it isn't the most popular members of 1B or the most forefront characters of the class, if you will, it's still good to see that they're being put to use and they're being kind of developed and being useful in some shape or form, even if it isn't to like the greatest of scales you're gonna find, because at the end of the day they're still a side cast. In fact, they're more side cast than the rest of 1A, because as we all know, a lot of characters in 1A, they're still a side cast. So the fact that we're seeing 1B members having kind of decent amount of focus, it's a pretty big step, because you'd think that some of the 1A members should be getting it before them, but nah. Horikoshi, he has a very interesting, and actually one that I'm a huge fan of, a very interesting way of handling his characters, because he doesn't necessarily force it. Like whenever it's time, he will give them the time that they need to develop or progress in whatever shape or form that Horikoshi has planned for them. And that's what we're seeing here. Granted, they were mostly used as crowd control, but then again, they are students and they probably wouldn't want to put them at any more risks than they need to. So having them do more crowd control work is probably a choice that the pro heroes did for their own safety, because yes, they're students and they are working to become heroes, but they're not full-fledged heroes yet. So the pro heroes probably didn't really want to put them in more danger than necessary, especially given the past of My Hero Academia, where we've seen some controversy, especially the whole thing with Bakugo where he was kidnapped by villains, and that became this whole controversy within the series on the news and everything where, people were starting to doubt UA. They probably don't want something like that to happen again, which is another reason why this whole thing with this war is happening in the first place, because they don't want the villains to take over. That is really gonna put the hero society in a bad spot. So this is both good PR, I guess you could say, in a very strange and large scale way, but it's also for students and civilian safety, of course. They're just giving these students a chance to do something that they are studying and training to do eventually. So let's talk about HAWKS and Twice and Dabi. But first let's talk about Twice and HAWKS, because they're obviously the big part of this chapter, like the main thing that we're gonna talk about. So HAWKS has Twice trapped within some kind of spell, well, not spell, that sounds wrong, some kind of move where he has his feathers kind of suspended in the air around him. I suppose it's a way for HAWKS to tell Twice that if he moves, he will kill him. He doesn't want to kill him, but he will do it. Now, eventually, this doesn't really work out, because as we saw in this chapter, Twice used Sadman's parade after a breakdown, because, this breakdown that Twice had was a big one, and it's one that I really felt personally. Like, to me, Twice has never really been that appealing of a character. I've said this in one past review when we saw the chapter with Twice and HAWKS, when they were kind of becoming friends. But within this chapter as well, we see some really big parts of Twice that truly resonated within me, because when we see Twice kind of, while in this emotional state, explain that nothing works out for him, that every time that he tries to help the League or the Liberation Front, something goes wrong. First, he tried to get in touch with Overhaul to create some kind of an alliance in order to strengthen the League of Villains. Things went wrong, Magni died, Mr. Compress lost an arm, things just went south for them. And now that he found HAWKS, granted he wasn't necessarily the one who kind of met HAWKS, that was kind of Dabi's part, but at the end of the day, Twice put all his trust into HAWKS. Whenever they got close, HAWKS got him to speak very freely in a way where HAWKS found out all of this information that he could use against him eventually, which is what's happening right now. And this is what's breaking Twice apart, that every time that he trusts someone, things go really wrong, and it is affecting not just him, but the people that he works with as well. And he's about to snap and go absolutely ham on HAWKS. Now, this is something that we're definitely going to be seeing in the upcoming chapters. This is probably going to be the next big fight that we're going to be seeing this arc. We're going to be seeing Twice versus HAWKS, and maybe even Dabi being involved with this, because we did see at the end of the chapter where Dabi was walking up the stairs and he's actually on his way probably to them. We don't really know for certain, but we can pretty much assume, because he knows that if someone has blabbed, it's probably HAWKS, because he's the one who introduced HAWKS to the League in the first place, which eventually became the Liberation Front, of course. And he was always suspicious of HAWKS because he was the number 2 hero. He had every right to be suspicious of HAWKS. Anyone would be. And now that he's seeing what's happening, it is becoming blatantly obvious to Dabi that HAWKS has blabbed, and he was never on their side to begin with. It was all a play. And he's obviously ready to pick a bone with HAWKS. Because of that, he's ready to burn him to a crisp if that's what needs to be done. So I think what we're going to be seeing is some kind of fight. I don't necessarily think that Dabi is gonna fight HAWKS in a 1 versus 1, and the reason I don't think that is because if HAWKS were to fight Dabi in a 1 versus 1, like a one-on-one fight, HAWKS would win. I can guarantee you that. However, we have Twice as well. It's not gonna be a one-on-one fight if this happens. It's gonna be a 2-on-1 fight, and HAWKS isn't going to have to retreat. There's no way he is fighting that fight. He knows his odds if that happens, and he is going to leave. I can guarantee it. If this doesn't happen, then HAWKS is literally not as intelligent as the Ultra Analysis book makes him out to be, because he's apparently a pretty smart guy. So if he knows what's best for him, he will hightail out of there if Dabi makes an appearance. Twice is bad enough for HAWKS. HAWKS has already said that himself, that Twice is the most terrifying guy within this whole organization to him. So if you add Dabi into the mix, someone who will take things very personally, he's going to need to leave right there and then. Like, he's not fighting that fight. There's no way. Anyway, I'm gonna end the review here. Let me know what you think down below in the comments about this chapter, about the whole HAWKS situation, about Class 1B being put to use. whatever may have piqued your interest within chapter 264, I'd love to know about it. Anyway, as always, if you did, be sure to Detroit smash that like button if you enjoyed, and subscribe if you haven't done so already. This has been Chaotic Plus, and remember, Mirko is waifu, Toga is laifu.